The restaurant my mother chose was one of those places where the menu doesn't list prices, and the sommelier wears a pinstriped vest that probably costs more than my first car. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over white tablecloths so crisp they could cut paper, and the quiet murmur of wealthy patrons created an atmosphere of refined elegance that felt almost sacred. I should have known this dinner would be a disaster the moment I walked through those heavy mahogany doors. My family has always had a complicated relationship with money and success. My father built a modest but successful construction business from the ground up, and my older brother Marcus followed directly in his footsteps, joining the company right out of college. They were always close, spending long hours on job sites, discussing contracts over breakfast, sharing an understanding of concrete and rebar that seemed to bypass the need for actual conversation. Meanwhile, I was the odd one out, the daughter who chose art school over business management, who wanted to paint instead of pour foundations. For years, I heard the same refrains. When are you going to get a real job? You can't make money with a paintbrush. We're worried about your future, sweetheart. The concern was genuine, I knew, but it stung nonetheless. Every family gathering became a reminder of my apparent failure to launch, a spotlight on my inability to conform to their definition of success. Then, 3 years ago, everything changed. I landed a position at a prestigious marketing firm, starting as a junior graphic designer. My art degree, the one my father had called a very expensive hobby, suddenly became valuable. My ability to conceptualize visual narratives, to understand color theory and composition, to create emotional connections through imagery, was exactly what the firm needed. I worked 80-hour weeks, took on every project offered to me, learned everything I could about branding, digital marketing, and client relations. Within 18 months, I was promoted to senior creative director. 6 months after that, I was made partner. At 29 years old, I was now one of 5 partners in a firm that handled accounts for Fortune 500 companies. My salary had tripled, then tripled again. I bought a downtown loft, drove a Tesla, and had a company card with a credit limit that made my stomach flutter when I thought about it too hard. But here's the thing about my family, they didn't really know any of this. After years of defending my choices, of facing skepticism and thinly veiled disappointment, I'd stopped sharing. When I got promoted, I mentioned it casually and changed the subject. When I bought my loft, I said I'd found a nice place. I dressed down for family events, drove my old Honda instead of the Tesla, and never, ever mentioned the company card or the expense account or the fact that I'd recently been featured in a business magazine as one of the city's 30 under 30 rising stars.
Why?
Pride, maybe. Or perhaps a desire to be loved for who I was, not what I earned. Or maybe, if I'm being honest with myself, I was waiting for the right moment to reveal everything, a moment that would feel triumphant rather than defensive. As I approached the table that evening, I saw my mother waving enthusiastically, her pearl necklace catching the light. My father sat beside her, already studying the wine list with a furrowed brow. And Marcus, tall, confident Marcus with his Rolex and his custom suit, leaned back in his chair with the self-satisfied smile of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. "There she is," my mother exclaimed, standing to embrace me. "We were beginning to think you'd gotten lost." "Just traffic," I said, hugging her back and catching a whiff of her signature Chanel perfume. I kissed my father's cheek and nodded at Marcus, who raised his wine glass in a mock salute. "Little sis," he said, his tone already carrying that edge of condescension I'd grown so familiar with. "Glad you could tear yourself away from your coloring books." I smiled tightly and took my seat, reminding myself that I was here for my mother, who'd organized this dinner to celebrate my father's 65th birthday. I could endure one evening. I could be the bigger person. If only I'd known how wrong I was. The meal began pleasantly enough. We ordered appetizers, oysters for the table, a burrata that cost $45, and some kind of tuna tartare that arrived artfully arranged on a slate plate. My father talked about finally considering retirement, and my mother enthusiastically described the cruise she wanted to take to celebrate. Marcus pontificated about a new commercial development his company had been contracted for, dropping the project value, $7 million, before materials, with practiced casualness. I nodded, sipped my wine, and tried to enjoy the food, which truly was exceptional. The burrata melted on my tongue like a cloud, and the oysters were so fresh they tasted like the ocean itself. For a while, I thought maybe this evening would be different. Maybe we'd have a nice dinner, celebrate Dad, and part ways without incident. Then my mother, bless her heart, turned to me with genuine interest in her eyes and asked, "And how's work going for you, dear?"
Are you still doing the design thing?
The design thing, as if it were a phase, like my brief obsession with learning guitar in high school or my semester-long attempt at vegetarianism. But her tone was kind, so I answered honestly. It's going really well, actually. We just landed a major campaign for. That's nice, honey, Marcus interrupted, not even looking up from a steak, which had just arrived. But seriously, when are you going to consider doing something more stable? Design is great as a hobby, but you're almost 30. Don't you think about your future? I felt my jaw tighten. I do think about my future, Marcus. And I'm quite happy with my career path. Career path, he repeated, chuckling as he cut into his meat. Blood-red juice pooled on his plate. That's generous. Look, I'm not trying to be harsh, but let's be real here. You make what, 40, 50,000 a year? Maybe 60 if you're lucky? How are you even affording rent in this city? My mother placed a hand on Marcus's arm. Now, that's not really appropriate dinner conversation. No, Mom, someone needs to say it, Marcus continued, warming to his theme. He'd had 3 glasses of wine already, I noticed, and his cheeks were flushed. We've been tiptoeing around this for years. Dad built a real business. I work in a real industry. We're talking about getting her a position in our company, maybe in the office handling. I don't know, filing or something. She could actually make a decent living. Filing. I repeated slowly, my voice dangerously quiet. Or reception, maybe. Something with benefits, at least. Something that doesn't involve living paycheck to paycheck while pretending that doodling is a career. He speared a piece of steak and pointed his fork at me. I'm saying this because I love you, sis. But you're being impractical. You're being useless in terms of building real wealth, real security. It's time to grow up. Useless. The word hung in the air like a slap. Around us, the genteel clink of silverware and murmur of conversation continued, oblivious to the small nuclear explosion happening at our table. My mother's eyes went wide, and even my father, who'd been largely quiet, looked uncomfortable. Marcus, that's enough, my father said, but his tone lacked conviction. Because hadn't he thought the same thing for years? Hadn't they all? Useless, I repeated, setting down my wine glass with careful precision. My hand was trembling, not with sadness or hurt, but with a fury so pure it felt almost cleansing. That's an interesting word choice. Oh, come on. Don't be sensitive, Marcus said, that infuriating smile still on his face. You know what I mean. I'm just trying to help. You're my little sister, and I don't want to see you struggling when you're 50, still pretending that art is going to pay the bills. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud break, but rather a quiet, definitive click, like a lock opening, or perhaps closing. Years of biting my tongue, of downplaying my success, of trying to be humble and unassuming, of wanting to be loved for myself rather than my accomplishments, all of it dissolved in the face of that single word. Useless. I picked up my menu, which I'd barely glanced at before, and really looked at it for the first time. I noted the prices, now clearly visible to my calmer, clearer eyes. The appetizers we'd shared, $180. Marcus's steak, $95. My mother's Chilean sea bass, $78. My father's lamb, $88. My own untouched salmon, $72. Wine. They'd ordered 2 bottles so far, one at $150 and another at $200. The bill would be substantial. Very substantial. And I was going to pay every last cent of it. I caught our waiter's eye, a young man named Philippe with immaculate posture and a French accent that might or might not have been genuine. He glided over with that particular grace that expensive restaurants seem to instill in their staff. Philippe, I said, smiling warmly, What would you recommend for dessert? And actually, let's start with another round of drinks for the table. What's your best champagne? Philippe's eyes lit up. We have a wonderful Dom Perignon 2008, madam. Or, if you're interested in something truly special, we received a shipment of Krug Claus d'Ambonne 2000. The Krug, I said decisively. And bring your dessert menu. Actually, bring one for each of us. I think we should all indulge tonight. My mother looked confused. Honey, that's very sweet, but you don't have to. Oh, I insist, I said, still smiling. It's Dad's birthday, after all. We should celebrate properly. Marcus snorted. Sis, do you even know how much that champagne costs? Maybe stick to something more in your budget. I think I'll be fine, I said evenly. Philippe departed, and an uncomfortable silence settled over the table. My father cleared his throat and attempted to shift the conversation back to neutral territory, asking about my mother's book club. But Marcus, emboldened by wine and his own sense of superiority, wasn't finished. Seriously, though, he said, leaning forward, we need to have a real conversation about your finances. Are you in debt? Do you need help? Because I know you're proud, but there's no shame in admitting you made a mistake with the whole art school thing. We can help you get back on track. Back on track, I mused, swirling my wine. Interesting. And what would on track look like, Marcus? A real job, steady income, benefits, retirement planning. You know, the things actual adults think about. He gestured around the restaurant. Places like this? You should be able to afford them without stressing about how you'll make rent next month. You think I'm stressed about rent? I asked, genuinely curious about his delusion. Well, aren't you? On a designer salary? He said designer, the way one might say parking attendant or mall kiosk operator. Jobs that were perfectly respectable but that he clearly considered beneath him. Philippe returned with the champagne, presenting the bottle with a flourish. The label was understated but elegant, and I noticed my father's eyes widen slightly when he registered what it was. The bottle was opened with ceremony, poured into crystal flutes that caught the light like liquid gold. Excellent choice, madam, Philippe said. And for dessert, what's the most decadent thing you have? I asked. The chocolate soufflé is prepared tableside and serves two, or we have a tasting plate of our pastry chef selections. There's also a cheese course if you prefer. Let's do the tasting plate for the table, the cheese course, and two soufflés. And actually, Philippe, I'd like to see your after-dinner drink menu as well. I think my father would enjoy a nice cognac for his birthday. Certainly, madam. Excellent choices. As Philippe departed again, Marcus actually laughed, a sharp, incredulous bark. What are you doing? Do you have any idea what this meal is going to cost? You can't afford this. Can't I? I took a sip of champagne. It was extraordinary, complex and layered, with notes of brioche and hazelnut, a finish that lasted forever. Worth every penny of its $800 price tag. No, you can't. Jesus, are you trying to put yourself into bankruptcy to prove some kind of point? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You don't think about consequences. You just drift along pretending everything's fine when it's obviously not. My mother put her hand on my arm. Sweetheart, this is very generous, but Marcus has a point. This is getting quite expensive. Why don't we split the bill like we usually do? Because, I said, setting down my champagne flute and looking at each of them in turn, I want to do something nice for Dad's birthday. And because, contrary to what Marcus believes, I can actually afford it. On a designer's salary, Marcus said flatly. Sure. Not on a designer's salary, I corrected. On a partner's salary. The words dropped into the conversation like stones into still water. Ripples of confusion, then comprehension, spread across their faces. Partner, my father repeated. I'm a senior creative director and partner at Henderson and Associates, I said, my voice calm and clear. I have been for almost 2 years now. We handle creative campaigns for 12 Fortune 500 companies, including 3 in the top 50. My base salary is $280,000, not including bonuses, which last year totaled another $150,000. I own a 12% stake in the firm, which is currently valued at approximately $4.2 million. The silence was absolute. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to have faded away. You, my mother started, then stopped, her hand over her mouth. I own a 1,800 square foot loft in the Belmore building downtown. Bought it outright, no mortgage. I drive a Tesla Model S, which is in the parking garage, because I didn't want to seem pretentious. And this meal, all of it, including that $800 bottle of champagne Marcus is currently drinking, I'm paying for it with my company card, because dinners like this are exactly what it's for when I'm entertaining family. Marcus had gone pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to value me for who I am, not what I earn. I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I wanted to come to family dinners and be your daughter, your sister, not some paycheck to be judged or a success story to be paraded around. But since we're apparently measuring worth in dollar signs now, since I'm useless because you assumed I was poor, well, let's put everything on the table, shall we? The rest of the meal was perhaps the most uncomfortable 90 minutes of my life, and I've sat through a root canal without adequate anesthesia. The desserts arrived, elaborate confections that probably tasted amazing but might as well have been sawdust for all the enjoyment anyone derived from them. The soufflés rose with perfect, golden brown peaks. The cheese course featured 7 varieties from around the world, each with its own accompanying preserve and cracker. My father's cognac came in a snifter so large it required 2 hands to properly cup. No one spoke beyond the bare minimum. Please pass the... Would you like to try? Thank you. My mother kept looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decode. Hurt, maybe, or confusion, or perhaps just shock. Her carefully applied lipstick had worn off in patches, and she kept touching her pearl necklace as if it were a rosary. My father studied his cognac with intense focus, as if the amber liquid might contain answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. His birthday dinner, meant to be a celebration, had turned into something else entirely, and the weight of that guilt settled on my shoulders even as I reminded myself that I wasn't the one who'd started this. And Marcus oscillated between pale silence and red-faced fury, his jaw clenching and unclenching as he clearly tried to formulate something to say. I watched him pick up his fork, set it down, pick it up again. He'd barely touched his dessert, a chocolate mousse with gold leaf that probably cost more than what he assumed my weekly grocery budget was. When Philippe brought the check, I was ready. I pulled out my company card, black metal, heavy in my hand, with my name embossed in silver letters, and handed it to him without even glancing at the total. Excellent, Madame Chen, Philippe said, recognizing the name from the reservation I'd modified to put under my name earlier, using my phone under the table. I'll return shortly. Madame Chen, Marcus finally spoke, his voice hoarse. You made the reservation? I called ahead and changed it, I admitted. About an hour ago. I wanted to make sure they knew to bring the check to me. You planned this, he said, and I couldn't tell if it was an accusation or a statement of fact. No, I said honestly. I planned to have a nice dinner and celebrate Dad's birthday. You're the one who called me useless. You're the one who suggested I needed you to rescue me from my pathetic life. I just decided to correct the record. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years hiding my success to avoid being defined by money, and here I was, using that very money to make a point. But sometimes, people only understand the language they speak. And my family had been speaking in dollars for as long as I could remember. Philippe returned with the receipt. I signed it, added a 30% tip, because none of this was his fault and he'd provided impeccable service, and tucked my card back into my wallet. The total, for anyone keeping track, was $3,847. My mother made a small sound. Not quite a gasp, not quite a whimper. She'd seen the number, probably, or at least had done enough mental math throughout the evening to know it would be substantial. We should go, my mother said quietly. It's getting late. The walk to the parking garage was silent. The click of my mother's heels on pavement, the distant sound of traffic, the wheeze of my father's breathing, these were the only sounds in our small, awkward bubble of family dysfunction. A light rain had started, the kind of mist that doesn't soak you, but makes everything glisten under the streetlights. I watched droplets form on car windshields as we passed. At the garage entrance, my father finally spoke. "You should have told us." It wasn't accusatory, just sad. Tired. Resigned, maybe, to the fact that somewhere along the way, we'd lost the ability to really communicate. "I know," I said. "I should have." But every time I tried, it felt like I was bragging or trying to prove something or... I trailed off, unsure how to explain years of complicated feelings in a parking garage. "Do you remember when I first got promoted to senior director? I called to tell you, and the first thing you said was, 'That's nice, honey, but is it paying the bills?' Not congratulations. Not I'm proud of you. Just concerned that it still wasn't enough." My father's face crumpled slightly. "I don't remember that." "I do," I said softly. "I remember all of them. Every skeptical question, every worried frown, every conversation that implied I was making a mistake. So eventually I just stopped sharing." "I didn't know," Marcus said suddenly. His voice was rough, stripped of its earlier confidence. "About any of it. The partnership, the loft, the... Jesus, Rachel. I didn't know." "I know you didn't know," I said. "That's why you felt comfortable calling me useless." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "I shouldn't have said that." "No," I agreed. "You shouldn't have. But you did, and that tells me something important about what you really think of me. About what you've always thought of me." "That's not fair," he protested, some of his old defensiveness returning. "You've been hiding all of this for years. You let us think." "I let you think what you wanted to think," I interrupted. "I didn't lie. I just didn't correct your assumptions. And maybe that was wrong of me, but Marcus, you never asked. None of you asked. You just assumed that because I chose a different path, because I didn't follow Dad into construction, because I wanted to make art, that I must be failing. We worried about you," my mother said, her voice small, fragile in the damp night air. "We just wanted you to be okay." 3 weeks passed before any of us spoke again. 3 weeks during which I threw myself into work with perhaps unhealthy intensity, pulling late nights on a rebrand for a tech startup and personally overseeing every detail of a campaign launch for a sustainable fashion line. My team started giving me concerned looks, and my assistant Maya finally asked, point blank, if I was okay. "Family stuff," I said, which was both true and entirely insufficient to explain the knot of emotions I'd been carrying around like a stone in my chest. "The dinner with a company card?" she asked. She'd processed the expense report, after all, and had probably noted the unusually high total for what I'd listed as client entertainment. "Yeah," I admitted. "That one." "Want to talk about it?" I did, surprisingly. So over coffee in my office, with the door closed and the city stretching out beyond my windows, I told her everything. About years of feeling less than, about Marcus calling me useless, about the explosive revelation that followed. Maya listened without interrupting, occasionally refilling our cups from the French press on my desk. "Damn," Maya said when I finished. "That's wow. I think I might have nuked my relationship with my family," I said quietly, staring into my coffee as if it might offer absolution. "And I'm not sure if I did the right thing, or if I was just being petty and vindictive." "Can it be both?" Maya asked. "Look, from what you're telling me, they spent years dismissing your choices and your success. And your brother was particularly brutal about it. You don't owe them false modesty or diminishment of your accomplishments just to make them comfortable. But did I have to be so dramatic about it?" "Maybe that was the only way they'd actually hear you," she pointed out. "Words weren't working. Subtle hints weren't working. Sometimes you need the equivalent of an air horn to get people's attention." I laughed despite myself. "A $3,800 air horn. Hey, that's what company cards are for, right? Impactful client presentations." She grinned, then sobered. "Seriously though, Rachel, have they reached out?" "My mom texts every few days. Just little things, like she's testing the waters. She sent me a recipe for apple pie yesterday, out of nowhere. My dad sent a card, an actual physical card in the mail, which is very him. Marcus. I trailed off. Nothing from Marcus. The card from my father sat on my desk, leaned against a framed photo of our last family vacation before everything got complicated. His handwriting was shaky. He'd never been much for writing, but the message was simple. I'm sorry. I'm proud of you. I always have been, even when I didn't know how to say it. Love, Dad. I'd read it so many times the creases were beginning to wear. Give it time, Maya advised. This kind of thing doesn't resolve overnight. She was right, of course. And then, exactly 3 weeks and 2 days after the dinner, my brother showed up at my office. My assistant called up from reception, her voice uncertain. Rachel? Your brother is here. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. Should I send him up or? My heart rate spiked. I glanced at my calendar. I had a meeting in 45 minutes. Enough time, but also a convenient excuse if I needed one. Send him up. I stood, smoothed my dress, a deep burgundy sheath that I'd been told made me look powerful, and tried to prepare for, what? An apology? Another fight? I had no idea. When Marcus walked through my office door, I barely recognized him. Not physically. He looked the same expensive suit, same styled hair, but his entire demeanor was different. The swagger was gone, replaced by something humbler, almost nervous. He carried a coffee from the shop downstairs, which he set on my desk without drinking from it. A peace offering, perhaps. Rachel, he said. Thank you for seeing me. Of course. Sit down. I gestured to the chairs across from my desk, then thought better of it. Actually, let's sit on the couch. This doesn't need to be that formal. We settled on the leather sofa by the windows, an awkward 3 feet between us. The city stretched out below, tiny cars, tiny people, everyone going about their lives unaware of this small moment of potential reconciliation happening 40 stories above them. The silence stretched for a moment before Marcus spoke. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he began, about what happened at the dinner, about what I said to you, about everything, really. I've been talking to my therapist about it. You have a therapist? I asked, surprised. Marcus had always seemed so put together.
So certain.
Started seeing her about 6 months ago, he admitted. Work stress, initially. But we've been unpacking some family stuff too. And after the dinner, we've had a lot to discuss. This vulnerability was new. I softened slightly, curious where this was going. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he continued, about what happened at the dinner.
About what I said to you.
About everything, really. I waited, giving him space to continue. I was a complete asshole, he said bluntly. And I'm not saying that to minimize it or to get you to tell me it's okay, because it's not okay. I called you useless, Rachel. My own sister. I dismissed your entire career, your accomplishments, your life, because I made assumptions based on, what? My own narrow definition of success? My own insecurities. Your insecurities? I repeated, surprised. He laughed bitterly. You're the one who actually made it on your own. Built something from nothing. I just walked into Dad's company and followed a path that was already laid out for me. I've been coasting on his reputation for years. And maybe, somewhere deep down, I resented that you took the harder path and succeeded anyway. This was not what I'd expected. Marcus. Let me finish, he interrupted gently.
Please.
I need to say this. I nodded. I treated you like a failure because it made me feel better about my own choices. If you were struggling, if you were barely making it, then that validated my decision to play it safe, to do what was expected. But you weren't struggling. You were thriving. And I couldn't see it because I didn't want to see it. He ran a hand through his hair, messing it up in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable, more like the brother I remembered from childhood, before careers and expectations created walls between us. When you paid that bill, when you pulled out that card and I saw your name on it, not Miss Chen but Rachel Chen, partner, it was like getting hit by a truck. Everything I thought I knew about you, about your life, about our family dynamics, it all just shattered. And I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to piece together how I got it so wrong. You got it wrong because I let you. I said quietly. I hid my success from you. From all of you. Why? He asked. I mean, I think I know why now, but I want to hear it from you. I looked out the window at the city below, gathering my thoughts. Because I wanted to be loved for me, not for what I earned or achieved. I wanted to walk into family dinners and be Rachel, your sister, not Rachel, the successful partner. I wanted our relationships to be about who we are as people, not about resume comparisons. But we didn't give you that option, did we? Marcus said. We made it about success and money and real jobs anyway. We just assumed you were on the wrong end of the equation. Yeah, I agreed. You did. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice broke slightly. I'm so sorry, Rachel. For everything. For years of subtle put-downs and patronizing comments. For calling you useless. For not seeing you really seeing you for who you are and what you've accomplished. For being so wrapped up in my own narrow worldview that I couldn't recognize success when it was sitting right across the dinner table from me. Tears were running down my face, and I didn't bother to wipe them away. I'm sorry, too. For hiding everything. For not trusting you all enough to share my life with you. Can we start over? Marcus asked. Not completely. I don't want to erase the past because I think we both need to remember this, learn from it. But can we start fresh? Can I get to know my sister, the actual real person you are, not the person I assumed you were? I'd like that, I said. He moved closer and I let him hug me. We sat there on the couch in my office, two siblings who'd lost sight of each other and were tentatively finding their way back. So, Marcus said finally, pulling back and wiping his own eyes. Tell me about your company. I want to hear about it, about what you do. For real this time.
So I did.
I told him about the campaigns I'd worked on, the satisfaction of seeing a brand come to life through strategic creative work, the challenge of managing a team and balancing artistic vision with client needs. I told him about the failures too, pitches lost, ideas rejected, the learning curve of leadership. He listened, really listened, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite obligation. That's incredible, he said when I finished. You built something real, Rach. Something that matters. So did you, I pointed out. Dad's company has grown under your management. You've expanded into new markets, taken on bigger projects. True, he acknowledged. But I did it with a safety net. You did it on your own. Different doesn't mean better or worse, I said. It's just different. And maybe that's something we all need to remember. He nodded thoughtfully. Mom wants to have dinner again. A do-over, she called it. Would you be willing? No fancy restaurant this time. Just her pot roast at the house. I smiled. Mom's pot roast sounds perfect. And I promise, Marcus said, standing up, no one will call you useless. In fact, I'll probably embarrass you by bragging about my incredibly successful sister to anyone who'll listen. Please don't do that either, I laughed. Can we just aim for normal? Normal, he agreed. We can do normal. After Marcus left, I sat in my office for a long time, watching the sun set over the city. The sky turned from blue to pink to orange to purple, and I watched the lights begin to flicker on in buildings across the skyline. Each light represented someone, working late, or starting their evening, or living their life in ways I'd never know. It was humbling and comforting at the same time. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Marcus told me he stopped by. Sunday dinner? 6 p.m.? Just family. Red heart. I stared at the message for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. 3 weeks ago, I would have said yes immediately, grateful for any opening, any chance to repair things. But I'd learned something in those 3 weeks of silence and reflection. I'd learned that I didn't have to rush back into old patterns just because the door was open again. But I'd also learned that holding grudges felt worse than taking risks. That my family, for all their faults, was trying. That growth was messy and uncomfortable and required everyone to be willing to change. I typed back, I'll be there. And I would be, because family, I'd learned, wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about always understanding each other, or never screwing up, or having identical definitions of success. It was about showing up, even when things were hard. It was about being willing to be uncomfortable, to have difficult conversations, to admit when you were wrong, and try to do better. Sunday came faster than I expected. I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes, trying to decide what to wear. Not too fancy. I didn't want to seem like I was making a point, but not too casual either. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I finally settled on jeans and a cashmere sweater, simple but expensive if you knew what to look for. Comfortable but confident. I drove the Tesla. When I pulled up to my parents' house, the same modest two-story where I'd grown up, with its slightly overgrown garden and the basketball hoop Marcus and I used to fight over, I sat in the car for a moment, gathering my courage. The house looked the same as it always had, but I felt different. I was different. My mother opened the door before I'd even reached the porch steps, as if she'd been watching for me. She looked smaller than I remembered, older, and when she hugged me, she held on just a beat longer than usual. "I'm so glad you came," she whispered. "Me too," I said and meant it. Inside, the house smelled like pot roast and fresh bread, the sense of my childhood. My father stood when I entered the living room, awkward and uncertain, before pulling me into a hug that said everything his card had tried to express. Marcus was there too, with his wife Jennifer, who I'd always liked but rarely saw. She smiled at me warmly, without the pity or condescension I'd sometimes sensed before. Maybe Marcus had talked to her. Maybe she'd known all along that something was off about how they all treated me. Dinner was normal. Surprisingly, wonderfully normal. We talked about mundane things, my mother's book club, my father's plans for the garden in spring, Marcus and Jennifer's upcoming trip to Costa Rica. No one mentioned money, or success, or careers. No one asked invasive questions or made assumptions. But toward the end of the meal, as we were clearing plates, my father cleared his throat in that way that meant he had something important to say. "I wanted to tell you all something," he began. "I've been thinking about what happened at the birthday dinner. About a lot of things, really. And I realized I owe Rachel an apology. A real one." He looked at me, and I saw tears in his eyes, something I'd witnessed maybe twice in my entire life. "I built my business with my hands," he said. "And I was proud of that. Still am. But somewhere along the way, I started thinking that was the only way to build something real. That if I couldn't see it, touch it, stand in front of it, then it wasn't as valuable. And that was wrong." His voice cracked slightly. "You built something just as real as I did. Maybe more so. You built it with your mind, your creativity, your talent. And I should have seen that. I should have celebrated it. Instead, I worried and questioned and made you feel like you weren't enough. And I'm sorry, Rachel. I'm so sorry." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. My mother was crying openly now, and even Marcus looked emotional. "I'm proud of you," my father continued. "Not because of the money or the titles or any of that, though those are impressive. I'm proud of you because you knew who you were and what you wanted, and you went after it even when we made it hard. That takes courage I'm not sure I ever had." I stood and hugged him, both of us crying now, and felt something inside me, something that had been tight and guarded for years, finally begin to loosen. It was about being seen, really seen, and choosing to stick around anyway. The company card incident, as it would forever be known in family lore, had burned down some bridges. But sometimes, burning down old structures is the only way to build something stronger in their place. I gathered my things eventually, preparing to leave, and my mother packed me containers of leftovers despite my protests. At the door, Marcus pulled me aside. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For calling me out. For not letting it slide. For caring enough to fight for our relationship instead of just walking away." He smiled ruefully. "Though maybe next time you could correct me without the $800 champagne?" I laughed. No promises. I drove home through quiet streets, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The containers of pot roast sat on my passenger seat, still warm. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Love you, sweetheart. Thank you for giving us another chance." I pulled over to respond properly. "Love you too, Mom. Thank you for taking it." When I got home to my loft, I didn't see the expensive furniture or the view or the markers of success. I just saw home. A home I'd built. Yes, but one that felt more complete now, knowing I didn't have to hide parts of myself to maintain it. I still had that company card, tucked safely in my wallet. But I didn't think I'd need it anymore, at least not for family dinners.